Hello and welcome back to the Workbench. This is where we discuss ceiling fan history, trivia, and technical information. Today, we're going to start out by talking about China cold storage. China cold storage is a name that has confused fan collectors and aficionados for years because it has been printed on the labels of certain fans, and we've tried to figure out, is that a factory? Is that an importer? Is that where the fans were stored, like storage? Why is that? And a lot of the fans that seem to be affiliated with this label of China cold storage come from the industrial fan importer Leading Edge. So we're also going to talk about Leading Edge. So let's get started. In 1952, a company called China Cold Storage and Engineering was founded in Hong Kong by James Wu, the son of the owner of the largest taxi company in Hong Kong, and he designed and made air conditioners. So the name makes a little more sense, because in 1952, what were air conditioners necessary for? And that they were relatively new technology for keeping things cold. If you needed to store things at a specific temperature, air conditioners were very useful. Hence the name, China Cold Storage. In 1958, they introduced a new name, Weatherite. It was a name used for China Cold Storage products, and it later became a subsidy of them. In 1961, China Cold Storage and Engineering starts manufacturing air conditioners for Westinghouse. So, if you have a Westinghouse air conditioner purchased in the US or somewhere else, it was probably made by China Cold Storage if it was made between 1961 and the late 80s, and we'll get to that a little later. Could also have been labeled Weatherite. Skip ahead to 1975. Westinghouse labeled ceiling fans show up in the US in the 36-inch and 48-inch size. In 1975 and 1976, there's also two containers of fans that are imported from China Cold Storage to the US for residential sales. We'll talk about them a little later. They are a bit of a mystery. In 1976, the Leading Edge fan company was founded, and we'll get to them a little later. In 1977, the 56-inch Westinghouse fans show up in advertisements. 1978 is the last year for Westinghouse fans in advertisements. In 1979, the Emerson LaFan shows up at Sears, which has the same motor as the Weatherite, Westinghouse, and China Cold Storage products, and we'll talk about that a little later. In 1980, the Emerson LaFan shows up through Emerson's other distribution channels. In 1981, Leading Edge begins their contracts with Grainger. In 1982, Leading Edge was the first company to offer 277-volt fans. 1982 and 1983, Sears sells a fan that looks similar to the Emerson LaFan, but it's no longer affiliated with Emerson. Presumably comes from China Cold Storage, and we'll talk about that a little later. In 1983, Leading Edge patents a cast waterproof fan, and the pictures in the patent application show a China Cold Storage motor. In 1983, Leading Edge products are all over the Grainger catalog. In 1985, Leading Edge trademarks High Tech and Awesome 60. In 1986, the Leading Edge High Tech 56-inch industrial fan and the Awesome 60-inch fan show up in advertisements in the US. In 1987, a company called HUTCHISON-BOAG Engineering, a wholly owned subsidiary of Hutchinson Whampoa, acquires China Cold Storage and Engineering and its subsidiary Weatherite Industries for an undisclosed amount of cash. It's 1987. In 1989, Inchcape Pacific buys HUTCHISON-BOAG, and all of the ceiling fan factories are subsequently closed. 1990 is the last sighting of China Cold Storage Grainger products. Leading Edge, which is the supplier to Grainger as well as their own company, and we'll talk about them in a minute, shifts production to Thailand. Just finishing out the Leading Edge timeline. In 1996, Leading Edge patented rolled edge metal blades for low ceilings. So if you think about it, metal bladed fans were never intended to be used on low ceilings because they were primarily sold for residential use overseas, and then where there were higher ceilings, and then they started importing them here. Our ceilings are lower. We shifted to wood blades. At some point, there was a UL and OSHA designation that metal-bladed fans in the US have to be installed on a 10-foot or higher ceiling. However, Leading Edge patented a blade that was able to get around that by having a rolled edge, so if you stuck your hand into it, it won't hurt as much. And so they were able to market commercial fans for low ceilings. Also that same year, 1996, they patented a reversible blade for commercial fans, because again, all commercial fans had sculpted metal blades, and if you reverse those blades, they move very little air in reverse. And so there was really no point to reversing a commercial fan unless you flip the blades over. And they patented a blade that worked in both directions. In 1998, Leading Edge was sold to Marley MEP. In 1999, Leading Edge was dissolved. That same year, Big Ass Fans was founded, and the founder of Big Ass Fans asked Leading Edge for their Grainger connections. Leading Edge declines. And in 2018, China Cold Storage is officially dissolved. So, that gives us a little bit of history, but it tells us very little. But if we dig more into Leading Edge, we learn more about China Cold Storage and find out why we primarily only see their products from China Cold Storage. So let's get into it. In the mid-70s, a Florida lumberyard contacted a businessman named Gerald Bogage and asked him to compete with David Moss importing residential fans. So, if you remember the Moss videos, they started out at Lindsay Lumber. Lindsay Lumber asked David Moss to import some fans, and he made a big deal out of it, made big business out of it. He started with a second lumberyard. There was another lumberyard in the same area that wanted to compete. They didn't like that David Moss guy. They knew this businessman, Jerry Bogage. They said, hey, Jerry, you're a good businessman. Can you import some fans for us to compete with this Moss guy? So, for 6 months, Leading Edge was a residential fan company. And Jerry Bogage imported residential fans from whatever Asian factories, not China Cold Storage at this point. And he took his fans to the Chicago hardware trade shows, and he saw how many other residential fan companies there were advertising their products. He said, this market is flooded. This is not a profitable business to be in long term. But there were very, very few commercial and industrial fan importers at that time, or domestic manufacturers for that matter. He said, wait a second. Everybody's trying to get on these residential fan train, pun not intended. Nobody's really caring about commercial and industrial fans. I bet I could make a killing at this. So after 6 months, Leading Edge shifted from residential to commercial industrial. And interestingly enough, the names of their residential fans were High Tech and Mirage. So, how do we get to China Cold Storage? Well, remember those Westinghouse fans I mentioned. Turns out Westinghouse did a test program importing ceiling fans from China Cold Storage in 1975, and they never went further. They only imported a few containers. They were sold slowly over the next few years, and they never did any more business with them. But Leading Edge sampled the Westinghouse fans and said, wait a second, these are considerably better than the other imports on the market. So Jerry Bogage once again went to China Cold Storage with his own ideas and his own designs, and they were willing to make fans to his specifications. Now, apparently, he also went to the other manufacturers. At the very least, he mentioned Union, and he mentioned TAT, and tried to get them to make fans to his specifications, and either they couldn't or wouldn't. So he stuck with China Cold Storage, and he attempted to have exclusive contracts with them that they wouldn't sell fans to anyone else, and we'll get into that in a second. So when Leading Edge was founded, they considered Emerson their only true competitor. The only companies marketing industrial fans at the time were Emerson, Envirofan, and Airmaster, and they didn't believe that Envirofan or Airmaster took it seriously enough. All three of them were big companies that sold other things. Envirofan also did agricultural products. Airmaster did fans of all kinds, commercial, industrial, blowers, etc. Emerson made everything from garbage disposals to whatever. But Emerson was the only one really making a huge splash in marketing their products. So they really felt like Emerson was the only company worth competing with when they started. So, Leading Edge was the first company to market commercial and industrial fans in sizes other than 56-inch or 52-inch. Really, all commercial industrial fans were 56-inch except Emerson, which stuck to the 52-inch size because they were using the same products in their residential fans. So, the Awesome 60 came first, and it was the largest, most powerful fan available at the time. Magnum was the second version of it. The 72-inch Magnum was marketed to Fortune 500 companies that only bought high-end products, and their engineers spec'd the best. Philip Morris was their biggest customer. Philip Morris factories at one time had nothing but awesome Magnum 72-inch fans. I assume hundreds of them. Leading Edge had exclusive contracts with China Cold Storage for every market except Australia. China Cold Storage already had an existing customer through Westinghouse for 56-inch fans in Australia. So they couldn't get an exclusive contract for 56-inch fans in Australia, but they got an exclusive contract for every other size in every other country. Leading Edge had exclusive contracts for every fan China Cold Storage made except for 56-inch. Leading Edge also had exclusive contracts with Home Depot and Toys R Us. That's why every Home Depot and Toys R Us that you've seen that's been built during the time Leading Edge was in business has exclusively Leading Edge fans. So, we briefly mentioned Grainger, but if you're a fan collector or involved in the fan industry in any way, there's a good chance that you know Leading Edge because of Grainger, because their Dayton products, we later figured out, were actually Leading Edge products that were relabeled. And so a lot of times the fans that we like that are Leading Edge we're actually familiar with as Dayton. So a lot of people have wondered, why are they relabeled Dayton, which is Grainger's house brand, when Grainger sold Emerson fans as Emerson, they sold Fasco fans as Emerson, etc., etc. On the other hand, they sold Lasco fans relabeled as Dayton. So why were some relabeled and some not? And specifically, why were all the Leading Edge fans relabeled and sold as Dayton? Well, Gerald Bogage and Paul Thursby, the Grainger buyer, flipped a coin to see whose name would be on the fans, if it was Leading Edge or Dayton. Grainger won the coin toss, and so all the fans were labeled Dayton. However, that ended up being a bigger win for Leading Edge because now they could sell to Grainger's competitors like Graybar Electric and the other catalog orders and anybody else that didn't like Grainger or didn't want to deal with Grainger, and no one knew it was the same company. You know, if they'd had Leading Edge fans in the Grainger catalog, a whole lot of people would not have bought Leading Edge fans. But since they were Dayton and nobody knew for the longest time, they could sell to all of Grainger's competitors and anybody else that didn't want to deal with Grainger. At the time that Leading Edge patented their waterproof fan, Airmaster had the only other fan that was being marketed as waterproof. And you guys are familiar with that. It's the Relight Airmaster. And despite being marketed as waterproof, it's not really waterproof. It's pretty poor quality, honestly. So we've talked a lot about Mr. Gerald Bogage, and he was well known in the fan industry in the 80s. He was considered to be the Burton Burton or the P.T. Barnum of the commercial fan business. He was known for his tricks at trade shows. When he went to trade shows, he would get there early and hang Leading Edge fans 55 feet over his booth. When you got within 30 feet of the Leading Edge booth, the temperature changed dramatically. He would have pieces of toilet paper that were taped to various places near the booth so you could see where the air was moving, and then he would hang one of his competitors' fans and switch that one on instead, and you could see the difference. He also had a 60-inch fan chrome-plated, and he would have it hanging on a 40-foot down rod over the booth. I really hope there's pictures of that somewhere because I want to see it. So, some of you may know, some of you may not, that Marley bought the old Emerson factory in South Carolina. Well, that was part of a deal that Emerson did in the early 80s, selling their heating division, which was called Chromalox, to Marley. And that's why, after a certain point, the Emerson heat fans are no longer the Chromalox heat fans because they sold Chromalox to Marley. Emerson wanted to include the heat fan in that deal and sell it to Marley. Marley didn't want it, and that almost botched the deal. That almost, they almost canceled the deal over that. Many years later, when Emerson discontinued the Stratojet, it was because the company that made the blades for them went bankrupt. So, in the late 90s, when Marley bought Leading Edge, the people at Marley who organized the deal were originally Emerson people. So when Leading Edge sold to Marley, they were technically selling to Emerson, and they knew them from their competition with Emerson. So, I hope that answers a lot of questions. So, why don't we know much about China Cold Storage? Well, because they had exclusive contracts with Leading Edge. All their designs were proprietary Leading Edge designs, and Leading Edge kept that stuff very close to the vest. They didn't want it publicized who made their fans, or even that Dayton and Leading Edge were the same thing. They wanted everything kept pretty secretive so that they could market their fans to whoever and not worry about the competition. And they felt like they had the best supplier of imported fans. They felt like nobody else's factories, Union, TAT, SMC, whoever, had the same quality as the China Cold Storage fans. Now, There's a few anomalies in there, and I said we were going to circle back to them. So number one, remember I told you that in 1975 to 1976, there were 2 containers of China cold storage fans that were imported to the U.S. for residential sale. Now, I have a theory that those are the Sonadaires, because I've been trying to figure out who imported the Sonadaires. And 2 containers makes sense. There's very few Sonadaires out there. The thing that doesn't make sense is that Sonadaires have wood blades, and Hong Kong wasn't making wood-bladed fans until around 1980. And those, sure, the wood blades could have been added in the U.S., but those look like they were all packed together in Hong Kong. So that's an anomaly. I'm hoping to find out more. I can't find very much about them other than the company that imported Sonadaires had ties to Chicago, and they had ties to Washington State. That's all I can find. The other thing that's interesting is the Emerson LaFan. I asked the people from Leading Edge, do you know anything about this? And they're like, no, but it probably didn't violate our deals because they weren't importing the whole fan. They were just importing the motor. And because, of course, if you guys know the Emerson LaFan, the motor, lower canopy, switch housing all appear to be from China Cold Storage, but then the upper canopy and the blade brackets are all Emerson products, so they're the same products they used on blender fans and other things. Also, I have my suspicions that maybe the switch housing was also an Emerson thing, because it looks like a blender fan switch housing. I'm not sure. They're very similar. And that's also a clue, because if you think about it, there was also that Sears version that was not affiliated with Emerson. It had the, China Cold Storage, Weatherite, Leading Edge, Bell canopy, and more conventional wood blades. So there's clearly some mysteries we haven't solved yet as far as the residential fans from China Cold Storage. But as for their industrial commercial fans, they were exclusive to Leading Edge, with the exception of the ones that were sold through Westinghouse. Remember, the ones in Australia were sold through Westinghouse. That's why they have the Weatherite name on them. So, if I learn any more about that, I will update you. In the meantime, I hope we've learned a lot. By the way, I threw out their Mirage. Every so often, you see a Leading Edge product with the Mirage logo on it. They trademarked that for their residential fans, and apparently still used it a few years down the line. So if you have a Mirage branded China Cold Storage fan, that's pretty cool. I think we've covered everything. If not, like I said, if I learn more, we'll do an update video. In the meantime, please like, comment, and subscribe. As always, this video has a sponsor, and that sponsor is FanStick. Please buy FanStick.